Hey guys, welcome to Landscaping Newbie. Today we're going to be filling up some gaps between the pathway. As you can see in the prior weeks, I've already filled up the rest of it, but I just want to fill up this last gap because it's an eyesore. First, we need our tools. So we have here is a little shovel. The purpose of this is to basically dig out all the dirt, the grass, any debris in the middle of the gap because you want to clear it out before you fill it in. The second thing, caulk gun, very important. How else are you going to get the material in the gap without a caulk gun? So make sure you have a good one. So that's on the tool side. On the material side, the first thing we have here is paver sand. The purpose of this is to fill up the gap as much as possible because you don't want to waste all of your concrete at once. So this will fill it up to a nice level, and then you're basically done with it. The last thing I have here is Loctite concrete, self-leveling. The reason why I got self-leveling is I don't want to deal with the leveling myself, especially if you're a novice. You don't want to deal with that yourself. Maybe you do, but I don't. So this is what we have here. Before you actually start the work, you want to make sure that there's no rain in the horizon. The reason for that is depending on the type of concrete you're using, it may cause the curing process not to work out the way you expect it to. So make sure that you're operating with a few sunny days ahead of time. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to take my little shovel and I'm going to just start clearing the debris. So you see all this grass, I don't want any of that in there. Taking out some of that soil. These things are going to make it much harder to actually lay down the concrete, so I just want to get some of that stuff out of there. Also take out any debris in the process, like the little rocks that we may not want in there. Okay, so after you cleared out all the debris where you want to fill it up, you want to take some of this polymeric sand and you actually want to start filling up the gap as much as you can. The reason for this is, like I said before, you don't want to be wasting all of your concrete. A nice even level. This part is not too critical because I'm using self-leveling concrete. It's going to level on its own, but I just don't want to waste too much of the material. So the last step here is actually pouring the concrete. So if you've never used a caulk gun before, this is the time to learn. So there are several major components of the caulk gun. The first part, your caulk gun should have a way to actually cut the spout. Very important. You want to cut it at an angle so it makes it easier to pour. You're also going to have probably one of these little sticks to just poke a hole in the center so that the material comes out a little bit easier. And then you're going to be leveraging this little trigger to actually push out the contents. So first things first, I'm actually going to cut the spout. So you'll notice that on this one you can see little measurements for 1/4, 5/16. I'm just going to start with 1/4, see how that goes. So I'm putting this at an angle. And then the same trigger that I'm using now to eventually pour it out is what I'm going to use to cut the spout. Okay, so now you see the spout is cut off. Second step here is to actually poke a hole through here, otherwise it won't come out. It should just slide right through. You should see some wetness when you take that out. So let me put that back in place. The third step is to actually put the material into the caulk gun. Other caulk guns might differ, but once you get that in there, it's actually not going to push out. You need to do one last step. For this caulk gun, you actually need to flip it upwards, and then as you press the trigger, it'll actually squeeze the concrete out of it. Start pouring. So what I like to do is just start pouring from left to right, not worrying too much that it's a perfect layer because I am using self-leveling concrete, so it's going to level on its own, which is the reason why I bought this. But first I'm going to level this down a little bit. One thing to be cautious about is the edges of the path. If it dips down below the surface, you might have some of your concrete leaking out if you're using self-leveling. So in my case, I got a little lucky. There's already some existing concrete here to block that flow, so I can just start pouring. All right. Just a few hard squeezes, and that concrete is just going to come right out. In this case, I probably should have opened up the spout a little bit more so more of that concrete can come out. It'll just take me a little bit longer to pour all of it, but it's fine. You know, go back and forth a few times, get to a desired depth that I would like to see. And as you can see, as I'm pouring this, it's just leveling on its own. It's not much effort needed. Definitely a friendly job for someone who's a novice. Okay, the left side's looking pretty good so far. Try to stay in the crack. Don't want any of that concrete bleeding out. In this case, I should have probably filled this area with a little bit more sand. Could have saved myself some material, but I'm not gonna actually use this self-leveling concrete for anything else right now, so I think it's fine if I use the whole container. Back and forth a few times. Make sure you fill up the bigger dips. As you can see at this point, I got as much concrete as I wanted to get down. It's at the right depth. I'm making sure that the concrete is not bleeding over the side. On this side, I didn't have that concrete, so I just poured some sand to stop the flow, but everything else is looking good, and now it's just about waiting to see when it cures. So this was one of the ones I did a couple of weeks ago. As you can see, obviously it has already dried and cured. And the color will be a little bit darker, closer to cement, but because it is self-leveling concrete, it will have some elasticity to it. So when you see I push down, it has some movement, but it's good enough to stop any grass and other debris from entering that area and, you know, ruining your pathway. So that will be the finished product. So this was one of the first projects that I ended up doing when we moved into this house. Super easy, very forgiving. You don't need that much equipment. It's very straightforward. So if you have any issues like this in front of your house, I would definitely recommend starting with something like this, going to Home Depot, getting the materials you need, but it's very accessible for someone who's a newbie.